We're up to page Nun Bes, and we're wrapping around to Nun Gimel, I suppose. The second expression of Chesed, which is discussing here, is after ensuring a smooth birth as a result of the interaction between Chochmah and Bina down into Tiferes. We have to ensure that Tiferes, that energy which is birthed from that union, is also properly circumcised. And what that's referring to is the fact that, as I mentioned, even though in general we speak until now we've been speaking about the three upper spheros, Chochmah, Bina, and Das, and the lower seven spheros from Chesed down to Malchus. Within those lower spheros of Chesed down to Malchus, 7, there's really a subdivision of 6 and 1. Okay, from Tiferes to Yesod, and then Malchus. That's called a Vav. Those 6 spheros are like a Vav, which is we've discussed, is like a channel or a conduit. It's true that the energy is diffused through the different spheros on its way down, but those 6 represent a channel, a broad channel, including left, right, and center, which are then kind of imparted into Malchus, which is the 7th sphere. Malchus then generates that energy down into the lower realm, meaning the realm below it, for creation. So the child which originates that vital energy, which is birthed in Tiferes, kind of goes through this birth canal, as it were, goes through the experience of birth. It's moved down in order to be expressed and created, manifested in the world through Malchus. And therefore, that point of juncture between Yesod and Malchus is a place where interference can occur. And that is and that's compared to the in that way it's compared to the bris milah. So that those 6 spheros, which are like a vav, would actually correspond to in a certain way, like I said, that channel, that conduit, correspond to, again, a channel where potential energy flows. I don't want to be too graphic with the analogy, but at that point, the tip, the end of that vav, yes, there is a place where these occluding forces kind of gather, and that would be around Malchus, at the tip of that vav. Right? The tip of that vav is Malchus, that's the 7th sphere, and it's where Malchus would express that energy out into the world. It's there where the occluding forces are. So that when a person is performing the actual physical act of bris milah, he is removing the orla, he is removing the occluding course and interposing kind of membrane or skin of that body part in order to reveal the crowning glory of that part of the body, which is the point from which the energy is released. When a person is fulfilling that physical mitzvah, he should have in mind that spiritually the similar thing that is happening. He's actually doing a type of spiritual circumcision in order to remove and cut away the intervening negative spiritual forces that would otherwise occlude between Malchus and the expression of the kingship of Hashem into the world. Yeah.
I guess my question has 2 parts. Is there a corresponding part for the female anatomy, and why don't we do female circumcision in Judaism?
There is there is a corresponding kind of component in the female anatomy as well. It's true, but in general,
some cultures do.
Well, one time, yeah, but in the female anatomy, it still takes more of the form, spiritually and also physically, as a makabel, which is as a receptacle, than as a imparter or as a giver, and that's in fact, mirrored physically in that part of the physiology as well. There's really no, I've never quite thought about this in such detail, but it could be that by nature of the fact that the female's malchus is really more inherently a recipient than it is a giver, so there's really less of a need for there to be a type of spiritual or even, and therefore physical, bris milah. Because the chitzonim basically are acting as females. They're almost described as being a type of spiritual prostitute or harlot that takes the place of the supernal man's depositing his energy in the designated and proper receptacle, but rather these forces kind of intervene and try and entice, as it were, the system to release its energy to them as opposed to the rightful mate. This was the type of thing that was even mirrored in Eden when Adam's energy was usurped by female demons rather than being shared with Eve. And all of that energy that went from Adam to the female side of darkness resulted in the proliferation of negative forces. And if the other day we were talking about reasons for where these negative forces come from, that would be at another source. And it mirrors what, the topic that we've just come on to as well, is that these spiritual forces, and we even find that idolatry and so forth and so on is very often described in the analogy of like a harlot or a prostitute.
Or be seduced. We say that in Shema.
Yeah, exactly, because it's yes, and it's about the seduction, and therefore it's really about these kind of occluding forces intervening and clinging, as it were, to the masculine side in order to receive their source of sustenance from that flow of life and that flow of energy, rather than letting it go into its proper direction. And therefore, that's where it's got to be cut away. And that's why in the physical human manifestation of these forces, it's going to be more related to the male component of Malchus than the female component of Malchus, right? Because those occluding forces are going to be less likely to be drawn to spiritually and then physically to the female aspect of Malchus, but more to the masculine. And that would perhaps explain why there's no female circumcision. Interesting idea. But in any case, what this means then is that when a person is, when, let's say, Malchus has not been circumcised, that means that these negative forces, these chitzonim, have not been removed. That is really going to affect the way in which that energy is released, and like I said, it could be that the energy is going to be inhibited in a great way, and actually be drawn in another direction, in the form of the chitzonim, and the result of that is going to be again kind of an imbalance of energy in the world, and physically, arguably this is also the case. The Gemara says, and Jewish sources seem to say, that the act is actually more enjoyable with the foreskin. And what that means is that without that being removed, then a person is more likely to emphasize and indulge in the physical pleasure involved in that act. Which means, again, it's going to be more about his receiving than it is his giving. And that's going to result in a deficiency. Number one, because the act itself is going to be more material, more sensual, and more self-interested than it should be. And that might result, like I said, in the desire to refrain from having children at all. And even if children are born of such a union, the energy that's resulting from a union, which is really emphasizing more an indulgence of physical pleasure and of taking more so than receiving, is going to connect into the spiritual realm in a much lower level, if at all. And the result, therefore, is going to be a soul, which is either a lower soul or a soul which is tainted. So you see here then that the ideas that we're talking about on a higher level are also focused more on a physiological level as well. So that the lack of circumcision, right, is more likely to end up, if in children at all, because it might not, but if at all, children of a lower spiritual quality, because the approach to the whole event is much less sensitive, spiritually speaking. Whereas, however, when that person is circumcised, he realizes that he's bearing the crown of the king, And that crown of the king, it's like a scepter of the king, is appropriate only to be used in the right places. And it's not just like the crown of the king or its scepter would not be drawn and exposed and used in dirty, impure, inappropriate places or ways that would be disrespectful to the king. So a person who realizes that he bears the seal of the king will act much more responsibly and much more seriously about using that seal. And number one, and number two, he'll make sure that not only it's used in the right context, but he realizes that there's something very godly, there's something very royal, something very elevated and godly about all of this. And it's much more likely, therefore, to have more elevated thoughts during the actual act. And in addition to that, the fact that the circumcision is removed, meaning these negative forces are removed, reduces to a certain extent the intensity of the physical pleasure, which enables the person, on the one hand, to enjoy it very much, but on the other hand, just step back a little bit from the intensity of that pleasure to enable the possibility that he'll be thinking about the fact that the real climax about this event is not what's going to happen in a few minutes between the couple, but what's going to happen 9 months later when you actually when this act is truly brought to its final fruition. And the fruit of their labors, right, is going to be harvested much later. And therefore, right, everything associated with the bris milah then is going to put the couple, particularly the man, who is the giver in this case, into the right mental and spiritual kind of, perspective.
I heard that
And the result of all of that, therefore, is going to be the desire for there to be children, to fulfill the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply, and not to refrain from having children, and that those children, which they have, right, and they will therefore be fruitful, will also be multiplied. I mean, they'll be of a magnitude, of a spiritual significance, right? And therefore, I'm trying to answer your question from yesterday about how practically circumcising affects both the spiritual and the physical world together. In any case, so this is, I guess this would be then another example of what he's talking about. On the one hand, fulfilling the mitzvahs of chesed in the physical realm, but when doing so, he's opening up our eyes to the worlds of possibilities of intentions that a person can have when he's going through the physical motion of the mitzvah. And the more we can think about, learn about, and have in mind these types of ideas when we're actually fulfilling the actual tangible aspect of the mitzvah, the more powerful, the more far-reaching that mitzvah is actually going to be. And the extent to which a person just does the mitzvah without having these intentions, he's operating on the plane of just a body, as it were, without a soul. But when he fulfills the mitzvah with the intention, he fuses the body of the action of the mitzvah with the soul, the spiritual component of his machshava, of his intentions, of his kavanah. And that's the type of thing that he's trying to open our minds up here to. And how doing so, in this case of mitzvah milah, great things are taking place. And having these intentions when he's fulfilling the mitzvah of bris milah has the effect of circumcising the malchus in the Adam Elyon, in the supernal man, which means removing those spiritually negative forces, including the malchus, in order that the act of procreation, as it were, that takes place through the extending of the energy from malchus into the realm of creation is going to take place in a more elevated type of a way. And it also ensures that the seed is going to be properly planted and received, and therefore then grow and multiply. So that if you think about it in terms of an analogy, we plant a seed here, the seed is lodged into the earth, and from there grows a plant or a tree with all of its myriad different details, the trunk and the bark and the branches and the leaves and the fruits and the pits and everything else. All of that proliferation is actually compacted into the original seed. Right? So that's what happens here as well. The divine energy is released from Malchus. It's seeded into the world. The world becomes like the earth, which receives that energy. And then, from there, all of the latent potential energy in that seed, as it were, proliferates and grows and branches off into divisions and subdivisions and on and on and on and on and on. But it all comes from that original. So if you can remove the chitzonim and make sure that it's planted properly, then the plant that's going to grow from that is also going to grow properly. And the same thing is true with, like I said, regarding children. If that seed is planted properly, the issue that's going to come forth from that seeding is going to be much more robust, much more elevated, a much higher degree of let's say a spiritual pedigree, as it were. And these types of intentions and this type of behavior on behalf of Klal Yisrael might be a reason why even the nations recognize a difference between the Jewish people and the non-Jewish people. There's something special and unique about the Jewish people. It stems from being connected to the spirituality of God in the Torah. If that's ever terminated, God forbid, or it's occluded, and the chitzonim prevent this flow of energy coming from God to the world, to the Jewish people, to the Torah, and then to the rest of the world, so then the Jewish people will become occluded and non-circumcised in a spiritual sense, just like the nations of the world. And you had mentioned the other day, didn't you, or was it Moshe? Maybe it was you, Moshe, about the Torah's mentioning of the circumcising of the heart. Yeah. So these are the two things, that the circumcision of the flesh is really associated with the circumcision of the heart. And to be circumcised just doesn't mean just removing the foreskin from that organ. It means everything that we're talking about, which is ultimately going to lead to the circumcision of the heart. What is the circumcision of the heart? It's removing the occluding forces from our heart so that we should truly and fully be able to connect to God properly. And it's interesting, I think about it, yesterday if we're talking about the relationship between Tiferes and Yesod, so the heart is also Tiferes, and the circumcision takes place in Yesod. So we find that I guess it's not coincidental that we find the idea of circumcision being applied here, both to the sexual organ and to the heart, because it's applicable both to Yesod and to Tiferes. They're part of the same flow. Let's start then the third form of Chesed. The third form of Chesed is well, actually, we didn't finish reading the text, did we, from yesterday? I just paraphrased. So we still have to finish off the text of the second one. So doing all of this, wrapping around to Nun Gimel, results in attaining the Tzadik Elyon. What's the Tzadik Elyon?
The righteous person on high.
Right, what's that referring to?
Moshe Rabbeinu?
No. Remember we spoke about how the spheros are in the form of a...
But Tzadik is a person, no?
Not necessarily, it's a concept. But again, Moshe is a let's say Avram is a person, but we still apply that to the persona of the Chesed and Yitzchak Devorah. So what we're referring to here is the tzaddik of the Adam Elyon. The Adam Elyon is a metaphor for the hierarchy of the spheros, which we spoke about being right in the form of a type of supernal man, and within the supernal man there is the sphere of tzaddik, which is Yesod, and that is Yosef a tzaddik. So he says, when a person does circumcision, and he has in mind these elevated ideas that we've been discussing, bofen shibiyoso malis orlis levavam, so that as a result of the physical circumcision of the reproductive part of the body, the person attains a circumcision of the heart. That's the connection that we just made intuitively before. Gorem shihiyat tzadik elyon bli orla. The result is that the Tzadik Elyon, which is a reference to the sphere of Yesod in the supernal man, it should be without an Orla. So that there can be a proper connection between Yesod and Malchus. And now Malchus can be revealed. Why is Yesod called Tzadik, associated with Yosef? Because we know that the midah of Yosef is Yesod, and Yosef himself is called Yosef a Tzaddik. So Avram is Chesed, Yitzhak Gvura, Yaakov Tiferes, Netzach and Hod is Moshe and Aaron. Here we're talking about Yesod, that's Yosef. Yosef is a Tzaddik. Why do we find that Yosef is a Tzaddik? Why is Yosef called a Tzaddik? Because Yosef's trial, more than any of the other patriarchs, was regarding guarding his sexuality, right? Potiphar, Eshes Potiphar, the wife of Potiphar, was the most beautiful woman in the world.
She was bad news.
And she was bad news. Why? Because she represented a klipa, a negative feminine force that was trying to receive the positive energy from Yosef, the tzaddik, and entice him and seduce him into using his energy in that bad way. And she herself was an Eshes Ish. She was married, of course, to Potiphar. She was trying to entice him into an act of adultery, right? Not only familial or filial adultery, but spiritual adultery as well. And he refrained. He refrained. He wouldn't listen to her cajoling and to her seductions day after day, day after day, day after day. He was alone, young, handsome, without any family, far away from friends, alone, and the most beautiful woman in the world is enticing him daily with all different types of emotional and physical and even spiritual arguments as to why he should deplete his energy into her, like a klipa. And he refrained. He held back. He held back until the. What's that?
Definitely.
Yes, and that's what made him a tzaddik. A person's ability to control his sexual energy is connected to the midah of Yesod, the midah of Yosef, yeah, and that's tzaddik. And therefore, we don't find everybody's called a tzaddik. Yosef, a tzaddik, is so called because of what we're saying.
How did Yehud play into that situation? Like, wouldn't he not be allowed to even be there with her in the first place?
That's certainly true. But generally, there were people at home. Ultimately, what happened was when people were not home, maybe he didn't know that everybody had left, or before he had opportunity to leave himself, she got hold of him because nobody was there. In fact, he didn't know. If I remember correctly, the wording of the verse, it says he came into the home to do his job. So he came from outside of the palace and found the place empty. And at that point, she wouldn't let him go. So he didn't intentionally get into a situation of yichud. He was lured into it. She actually created that situation in order to lure and entice him. The sages give different explanations as to what the Torah means when it says that he came in to do his job. According to one opinion, he came in to do his literal job, taking care of the household in whatever ways that he did. According to another opinion, he went in there to do the deed. He went in with the intention to do the deed, to do his job, to do the job, get the job done. And
With her.
Yes.
And then he changed his mind.
Yeah. Well, the sources say that when he was getting very close to actually doing the deed, he had an image of his father. There's Diukono Shel Aviv, the image of Avram, not Avram, his father, Yaakov, appeared to him. And he straightened out, and he disengaged, and in fleeing, she grabbed hold of his clothing and made the argument that she made. The husband wanted to see the clothing, by the way, and he saw that the buttons were ripped from the buttons. Like the shirt was torn. I don't remember the deal, but he deduced that the shirt was torn in a way which indicated that it was he that was fleeing from her, and not her fleeing from him. But still, he had to keep up a facade of innocence on his wife's part, and
he must have known.
Yes, he knew.
Your wife, so
yes, he knew what type of wife he had.
Yeah.
But in any case, without going there for now, the point is just that what does it mean that he had this vision of his father Yaakov? Well, according to what we're saying, I'm just working this out a bit as we go along. It actually fits in quite nicely, because Yosef was the sphere of Yesod. And he had an image of his father, Yaakov, which was Tiferes. And that enabled him to straighten himself out, meaning to get in line. And what was happening here was that Yesod was being brought into line with Tiferes, above Hod and Netzach, in order to align itself with Tiferes. Is exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about Ab and Iba giving birth to Yesod, to Tiferes, and then Tiferes passing down that energy through the lower six, culminating in Yesod. So he saw specifically this vision of his father, which is Tiferes, in order to impart within him the truth of Yaakov, the force of the Torah, because we said Tiferes is Yaakov, which is Emes, and that brought him in line in Tiferes in order to ensure that that energy should not be misused and directed out into the Klipot, but rather that it should be properly aligned with Tiferes and preserved in order to be expressed in the positive way, not through Potiphar, not through the wife of Potiphar. Right? He ended up marrying, of course, who? Yosef married the daughter of Dinah. As you remember, Dinah was raped by Shechem. Ultimately, she became pregnant from that union. The child, of course, was Jewish, even though the father was not. Dinah was. And Dinah and her daughter became estranged to the family. Probably.
Dinah too?
Was that?
Dinah as well?
I think so. Yeah, maybe it was just the daughter. Maybe it was just or not. It was
They
not.
wouldn't have rescued their sister only for her to be estranged.
Yeah, but eventually she became ostracized in some way, and I think that she went down to Egypt, or it could be that she was ostracized, but ultimately when Osnat, her daughter, became older, through this estrangement, found herself in Egypt, and Yosef was so beautiful. Again, his being a source of this energy which is expressed into the world. He was so beautiful. The Torah says that women would literally climb the walls in order to glance at his beauty. And he, as the viceroy of Egypt, was taken through the streets in a chariot, and his title and his identity was proclaimed before him. And as the people saw him approaching through the alleyways, the women would scale the walls and able to get close and throw carnations and ornaments and all types of different things.
I have a problem with this.
To get his attention.
Yeah.
In order to get his attention. And the reason for it fits beautifully into everything what we're saying, because his Bechina was Yesod, and Yesod is the source of life, and the feminine is drawn to that. And on the contrary, the more a man is reserved and withholds his energy, he is discerning about how he expresses that energy, the more it actually draws attention from the feminine. And that's what actually draws the Chitzonim to him as well. And therefore, what was happening on the spiritual plane was expressed in the physical plane, that he was drawing and attracting to himself because of the extreme expression of his masculinity, which is different than the way it's viewed in the Western world. In the Western world, a person's masculinity is usually expressed in the way in which he can run after women and conquer them, as it were. Whereas the Torah's way of looking at it, exactly the opposite. The expression of masculinity is to withhold it, to have strength, have self-control, and express it in a proper way. He's certainly being masculine by giving it, but really being masculine is giving it in the right context, which implies withholding it. And therefore, therefore, when a man holds that masculine energy, that's actually a stronger attractive force to the female than when he's constantly trying to brandish it and use it to conquer them. The best way to conquer a woman is by conquering oneself first. Of course, the intention is not to conquer a woman. The point, conquer in the language that they use. Right? The real way to win a woman is to win yourself over first. And so that was the pchina of Yosef. He was a tzaddik, and he was controlling that within himself. And as a result of that, it actually ended up attracting all of that feminine attention, which he wouldn't look at. He covered his eyes, and he would look down, even though he was getting all of this attention, and things were like falling and raining into his chariot. And he was deflecting it and not interested at all. But at one point, the daughter of Dinah, who was Osnat, and she's called Osnat, according to one commentary, from the word ason. Ason means like a terrible thing which happened, referring to the fact that she was born of the union of Dinah and Shechem, Hamor. But in any case, Osnat was scaling the wall with all of the other girls there, and she had an amulet that was given to her by her mother, on which it was written in Hebrew, Bas Yaakov, the daughter of Jacob. Of course, she wasn't the daughter of Yaakov, but she was the granddaughter of Yaakov. She was a female of the house of Yaakov. And like all the other women throwing ornaments and things, she threw her necklace in. And it landed right in front of his feet as he was looking down, and he saw Bas Yaakov in Hebrew. Among all the thousands of women that were gathering around, which he wouldn't look at, he had to keep going, and he didn't know who it came from. But ultimately, he used the amulet to find his kin. That is Osnat. I guess it's his niece, right? She's the daughter of his sister. So he married.
By somebody outside the family.
Yeah, but it was the daughter of his sister, so it's his niece. So I imagine it was a type of a Cinderella story. All of the women of the kingdom were called in order to see whose foot the shoe fits. I mean, who can read the Hebrew? So the women were coming and nobody could read it. What does it mean? Nobody could read it until finally Osnat came and she read Bas Yaakov. And he realized who she was and ended up marrying her. So that the wife of Potiphar was trying to intervene and intercede and prevent that thing from happening. But of course, a very important thing was happening when the events came round full circle like that, so that Yosef, who was estranged by his family, should unite with Osnat, who was estranged by the family, and the union of these two Jewish souls should take place in no other place than the flesh plots of Egypt. And all of the tikkunim that took place, which can't elaborate on right now, but all the tikkunim that took place as a result of the union of these two estranged Jewish souls from the house of Yaakov, meeting specifically the house of the flesh pots of Egypt, are what resulted ultimately in the redemption of the Jewish people and the receiving the Torah at Sinai and then the rest of Jewish history. It was all dependent on that act. Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
So it seems like the Jewish values are sort of antithetical to what the values were of and physical beauty is considered to be like it is and it isn't, because even all the way back to Abraham's wife, like physical beauty is like mentioned many times in Tanakh, even though we're not, as Jewish people, we're not supposed to value like beauty and appearance. It's supposed to be like a Greek thing or an Egyptian thing or something. Like it seems like there's a contradiction here. What's going on?
Judaism doesn't negate beauty. Judaism celebrates beauty.
Like the most beautiful.
The Kohen should be should be elevated from his peers in many ways, including his physical structure.
Okay.
But we certainly find that regarding the prophet as well. The sources, the Rambam brings it. The prophets are physically beautiful as well. But the difference would be this: that non-Jewish culture celebrates the beauty as the beauty alone, and it indulges in the beauty alone. Whereas Judaism recognizes the value of beauty, but the value of the physical beauty is really a manifestation of the spiritual beauty, and it should be secondary to that. Therefore, a person who has only physical beauty but no spiritual refinement is compared to a pig wearing a gold ring in its nose. The ring is beautiful, but it's an external ornament to something which itself is inherently improper, unkosher. And therefore, beauty for beauty's sake alone is not good. When beauty is really secondary and a part of a larger holistic picture, which involves spiritual beauty, then it enhances it. Doesn't detract from it. And the Jewish approach to this, therefore, is to conceal the beauty, not to negate it, but to conceal it, so that it should be revealed and appreciated in the proper context. And that's why in the Jewish sense of modesty involves covering the body, right? Covering the body, not to deny or to negate the beauty, but to cover it so that it's exposed in the proper context, which will ensure that the beauty enhances higher things and doesn't become the object of its own. But when beauty is flaunted just for beauty's sake, so then you run the risk of being purely physical. And that will negate all of the other spiritual potential that's behind it, right? And therefore in Judaism the body is covered aside from the face. The face might be beautiful, but we don't cover that because the face in Hebrew is panim, and panim means pnim, which means internal. So what we're saying is the person might be physically and bodily very beautiful, but that should be covered in order to be de-emphasized. The real value that you should find in a person should be bifnim, bepanim, on his face, meaning bifnim, the eyes are the window of the soul. The things that a person says expresses what's going on inside. So the beauty that we should be attracted to, the beauty of a person that our attention should be directed towards, should be the beauty which is bifnim, in the face. Once you recognize a person's internal beauty, then it was appropriate to reveal the external beauty in order to enhance the internal beauty. But if you're revealing only the external beauty, it actually deflects the person's attention from what's bifnim. And then what results would be all types of shallow attitudes and shallow behaviors, which can be connected to the types of things that we're talking about here, right? So does that answer your question? So that Yosef was very beautiful, but you see he was interested in concealing that beauty. He wasn't interested in using it to dominate. And if there was power that was attained as a result of it, it was through his control of it and not through his brandishing of it. Now, therefore, what we do is we circumcise the tzaddik ha'elyon, that means the sphera of Yesod in the supernal man. And then, in this way, we strengthen ourselves in order to protect ourselves from all of the things which can cause orla, the coagulation of negative forces around the sphere of Yesod. And therefore, Pinchas, kishemal orlis b'nei Yisrael, zocha lekahuna. For this reason, Pinchas, who circumcised the orla of b'nei Yisrael, as a result of this, he merited the kahuna. How did he circumcise the Jewish people? I don't think it means physically circumcising the Jewish people, because he didn't. Those who were, and those who weren't circumcised themselves later with Joshua on the eve of crossing the Jordan to the land of Israel. But I think what he refers to is circumcising the hearts of Israel. Why? Because many Jewish men had been drawn after the lures of the Midianite women, which is what happened regarding Kozbi Batsur, this Midianite woman who had attracted the prince of the tribe of Shimon to be engaged in sexual relations with her in the open, in public, and in the knowledge of all. And many men were drawn after that example because it was really an expression of what they held in their heart's desires. But when Pinchas came and he acted out of envy for God, that the result was cutting away all of this negative energy that had gathered itself around the hearts of many of the Jewish men, and that was a type of spiritual circumcision of their hearts in order to bring them back into a line with Tiferes, with the truth of the Torah. And because of this, it says, he was zocha to the kahuna. Why? Because through intervening on God's behalf and separating this couple from doing what they were doing, and as a result separating the other Jewish men from either acting or desiring to act with the Midianite women, he actually did a chesed to God, a chesed to Hashem. Why? Because he spiritually and physically removed the type of seduction which would result in an occlusion on Yesod, an abuse of the sphere of Yesod, which is connected, as we said, to releasing energy. Shemal Yesod me'oisa oila. What he did was he circumcised the Yesod, the sphere of Yesod, from that orla, from that negative energy which had gathered itself around it, and zocha lechesed. As a result of this, he was zocha to chesed. So he actually was like a Kohen who makes a sacrifice in the temple in order to beseech God and nullify the negative judgments to find atonement for the Jewish people. So because he did this, he himself became like a Kohen. In cutting away this cancer from the Jewish people, making it like a sacrifice, he did away with the severe sin of them and others, and as a result of that, restored harmony between God and the Jewish people, which is what a Kohen actually does by offering the sacrifices. So, as a result of this act, yes, Pinchas was zoche to actually gain the quality of a Kohen. We spoke of this morning about whether you can take the Kohenness away from a person. Yeah, becoming a halal. Here you can see that the Kohenship was actually added to Pinchas and his offspring. They became Kohanim as a result of this act. So from this, a person should learn to all other examples of midos es chesed as well. That if a person fervently executes acts of chesed, loving kindness, despite the fact that there might be all types of negative forces and delusions and desires to do otherwise, but if a person cuts all of that away, he's actually doing a very great thing. And in a way, he's becoming like a Kohen who serves Hashem by offering sacrifices in the temple.
Why does it say midas chesed and not midas chesed? It's like the measures of chesed rather than the measure.
No, it means
one.
it means el kol shar midos chesed, to all of the other examples of chesed. I mean, all the other forms of midos chesed, because there are 8 here that he's going to mention.
Oh, form. Okay.
Yeah, it's true that there is one
midos, and chesed is one midas.
That's right, but here he's actually developing a discussion of many types of chesed, where he's calling each type of chesed also a midah of chesed. Okay, let's end here, and B'ezrat Hashem, we'll start the next material next week.